5 saddest and most tragic events in African history. Throughout history, the African continent have witnessed some of the most tragic events ever. The consequences of some of these events can still be felt till this day, despite the fact that some of these events happened many years ago. From devastating wars to the tragic exploitation of communities, the continent has witnessed events that have left deep scars on its people and cultures. These heart-wrenching chapters reveal the complexities of human experience, highlighting the struggle against oppression and the quest for dignity. As we reflect on these sorrowful moments, we gain insight into the resilience of individuals and communities who have faced unimaginable adversity, reminding us of the importance of remembrance and the pursuit of healing. In this video, we shall take a deep dive into the 5 most devastating events in African history. But first, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our videos. In no particular order, let's get started. 5. The Rwandan Genocide. The Rwandan Genocide, which occurred from April to July 1994, was a catastrophic event that led to the death of an estimated 800,000 to 1 million people, primarily Tutsi and moderate Hutu. The roots of the genocide lie in a complex interplay of historical, political, and social factors. Colonial rule by Belgium exacerbated ethnic divisions between the Hutu majority and Tutsi minority, favoring the Tutsi for administrative roles. This created deep-seated resentment among Hutus. Following Rwanda's independence in 1962, Hutus gained power, leading to violent reprisals against Tutsis. Tensions simmered throughout the 1980s, culminating in a civil war in 1990 when the Rwandan Patriotic Front, comprised largely of Tutsi exiles, invaded Rwanda. The assassination of President Juvenal Habyarimana on April 6, 1994, sparked the genocide. Hutu extremists blamed the Tutsis and mobilized militias, leading to mass killings. Over the course of about 100 days, systematic slaughter occurred, facilitated by government propaganda and the complicity of local authorities. The international community largely failed to intervene, despite warnings and evidence of the unfolding massacre. The consequences of the genocide were profound. In addition to the staggering loss of life, the social fabric of Rwanda was devastated. Survivors faced trauma, displacement, and a shattered community. The RPF eventually took control, ending the genocide, but the aftermath left deep divisions and a need for reconciliation. The genocide also prompted significant international reflection on humanitarian intervention, leading to changes in policies regarding genocide prevention and response. Rwanda has since made strides in recovery and development, but the legacy of the genocide continues to shape its society and politics. 4. The Sierra Leone Civil War. The Sierra Leone Civil War, which lasted from 1991 to 2002, was a brutal conflict that resulted in significant loss of life, widespread atrocities, and long-lasting social and economic disruption. The war was primarily fueled by a combination of political, economic, and social factors, including corruption, poverty, and the exclusion of marginalized groups. The roots of the conflict can be traced back to the country's political landscape in the years leading up to the war. Sierra Leone gained independence from Britain in 1961, but successive governments faced criticism for corruption and mismanagement. By the late 1980s, widespread discontent among the populace, particularly youth, grew due to high unemployment, lack of opportunities, and deteriorating living conditions. The Revolutionary United Front (RUF), led by Foday Sanko, emerged in 1991, initially promising to address these grievances and establish a more just society. The RUF launched its rebellion from neighboring Liberia, employing brutal tactics, including mass killings, amputations, and the recruitment of child soldiers. The government, led by President Joseph Momo, struggled to contain the insurgency, leading to a breakdown of law and order. The conflict escalated as various factions, including the armed forces and other rebel groups, fought for control, resulting in a humanitarian disaster. International attention grew as reports of atrocities emerged, but initial interventions were limited. In 1999, a peace agreement was signed in Leone, but it failed to bring lasting stability. Fighting resumed, leading to further violence and chaos. The conflict officially ended in 2002, following the disarmament of combatants and the establishment of a United Nations peacekeeping mission. The consequences of the Sierra Leone Civil War were devastating. An estimated 50,000 to 100,000 people were killed, and millions were displaced. The war left deep psychological scars on survivors, particularly women and children, who faced sexual violence and exploitation. The economy was severely impacted, with infrastructure destroyed and livelihoods disrupted. In addition to the immediate human cost, the war contributed to a cycle of poverty and underdevelopment. The government faced challenges in rebuilding trust and fostering reconciliation among communities. However, Sierra Leone has made strides in recovery, with efforts focused on governance, justice for war crimes, and addressing social inequalities. The legacy of the war remains a poignant reminder of the need for sustainable peace, development, and the protection of human rights in the region. 3. The Congo Wars. The Congo Wars, comprising two major conflicts from 1996 to 2003, were among the deadliest wars in African history, resulting in millions of deaths and widespread suffering. The First Congo War, that lasted from 1996 to 1997, was primarily sparked by the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide. Following the genocide in 1994, millions of Hutu refugees, including perpetrators of the genocide, fled to eastern Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, leading to tensions with local Tutsi populations. The Rwandan government, led by the Tutsi-dominated Rwandan Patriotic Front, sought to dismantle Hutu militias and secure its border, which led to an armed invasion of Zaire. Under the leadership of Laurent Désiré Kabila, a coalition of rebel groups, primarily supported by Rwanda and Uganda, launched an offensive against the regime of dictator Mobutu Sese Seko. In May 1997, Kabila succeeded in overthrowing Mobutu, marking the end of his 32-year rule. However, Kabila's government soon fell out of favor with his former allies, leading to the Second Congo War, 1998 to 2003, often referred to as Africa's World War due to the involvement of multiple African nations, including Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia backing Kabila, while Rwanda and Uganda supported various rebel factions. The causes of the Second Congo War were multifaceted, including ethnic tensions, competition for resources, and power struggles between various armed groups. The conflict led to widespread atrocities, including killings, rapes, and the use of child soldiers. The war created a humanitarian crisis, displacing millions and exacerbating poverty and underdevelopment in the region. By the war's end, an estimated 5.4 million people had died, primarily from disease and starvation rather than direct violence. The conflict left a fractured political landscape and a legacy of instability that continues to affect the DRC today. Despite a peace agreement in 2003 and the establishment of a transitional government, violence persists in eastern DRC, fueled by ongoing disputes over resources, land, and power. The Congo Wars highlighted the complex interplay of local and international politics, the tragic consequences of colonial legacies, and the urgent need for sustainable peace-building efforts in the region. The wars also underscored the impact of resource exploitation, as the DRC is rich in minerals like coltan and diamonds, which have fueled conflicts and perpetuated cycles of violence. 2. Apartheid. Apartheid was a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination in South Africa that lasted from 1948 until the early 1990s. The roots of apartheid can be traced back to colonial rule, where racial divisions were entrenched by the British and Dutch settlers. Following the Union of South Africa's establishment in 1910, racial discrimination became increasingly codified, particularly with laws that stripped Black South Africans of rights and privileges. The formal implementation of apartheid began in 1948 when the National Party, representing the interests of the white minority, came to power. The regime sought to maintain white supremacy through a series of laws that segregated populations, restricted movement, and limited access to education, healthcare, and employment opportunities for the non-white majority. Key legislation included the Population Registration Act, which classified individuals by race, and the Group Areas Act, which designated specific areas for different racial groups, forcibly removing black residents from their homes. The consequences of apartheid were devastating. Economically, it entrenched poverty among black South Africans, limiting their access to skilled jobs and quality education. The education system was designed to perpetuate inequality, with inferior schooling for black children, which ensured a cycle of poverty and disenfranchisement. Socially, apartheid created deep divisions within society, fostering resentment and anger among the oppressed majority. The oppressive nature of the regime led to widespread resistance, including strikes, protests, and the formation of organizations such as the African National Congress, ANC, which sought to dismantle apartheid. Internationally, apartheid drew condemnation and led to economic sanctions and cultural boycotts against South Africa. The global anti-apartheid movement gained momentum, with activists like Nelson Mandela becoming symbols of the struggle for freedom and equality. The internal resistance and international pressure eventually forced the South African government to negotiate a transition to democracy. In the early 1990s, apartheid began to unravel, culminating in the first multiracial elections in 1994, which resulted in Nelson Mandela becoming the country's first black president. The end of apartheid marked a significant turning point in South African history, leading to efforts towards reconciliation and nation-building. Despite these strides, the legacy of apartheid continues to impact South African society, with ongoing issues of inequality and social justice that remain to be addressed. 1. The Transatlantic Slave Trade. The transatlantic slave trade was a horrific chapter in history that spanned from the late 15th century to the mid-19th century, involving the forced transportation of millions of Africans to the Americas as slaves. This brutal trade was driven by economic demand, racial ideologies, and colonial expansion, resulting in profound social, economic, and cultural consequences for both Africa and the Americas. The roots of the transatlantic slave trade can be traced back to European exploration and colonization. By the late 15th century, European powers, particularly Portugal and Spain, began to explore Africa for trade opportunities. The discovery of the Americas in 1492 created a demand for labor to cultivate cash crops such as sugar, tobacco, and cotton. Native populations in the Americas had been decimated by disease and violence, prompting Europeans to seek labor alternatives. The Portuguese were among the first to exploit African labor, establishing sugar plantations in Brazil and the Caribbean. As demand for labor grew, the British, French, and Dutch joined in, leading to an organized system of slave trading. European traders established coastal forts and trading posts, where they exchanged goods for enslaved individuals captured by African tribes or rival groups. This created a cycle of violence and conflict within Africa, as communities were destabilized to meet European demands. The Middle Passage, the leg of the journey that transported enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, was characterized by inhumane conditions. Captives were packed tightly into ships, often chained together, with little room to move. Many suffered from disease, malnutrition, and abuse, leading to high mortality rates during the journey. It is estimated that about 15 to 20% of enslaved individuals died during the crossing. Once in the Americas, enslaved people were sold at auctions and forced to work on plantations, in mines, and in households under brutal conditions. Their labor was foundational to the economic development of the Americas, particularly in the production of sugar and cotton, which became significant exports. The consequences of the transatlantic slave trade were profound and far-reaching. For Africa, the trade resulted in the loss of millions of individuals, including a significant portion of the population, which destabilized societies and economies. Families were torn apart, communities were destroyed, and the social fabric was irreparably damaged. The trade also fueled internal conflicts, as rival groups engaged in capturing and selling individuals to European traders. In the Americas, the legacy of slavery laid the groundwork for systemic racism and social hierarchies that persist today. Enslaved Africans and their descendants contributed significantly to the cultural, economic, and social development of the Americas, influencing music, cuisine, language, and religion. However, they faced brutal oppression, dehumanization, and violence throughout their lives. the abolition movements in the 18th and 19th centuries, driven by moral, humanitarian, and economic arguments, eventually led to the end of the trade. The British Empire abolished the slave trade in 1807, followed by other nations, but the impact of slavery continued to resonate long after its formal abolition. The transatlantic slave trade remains a critical aspect of global history, illustrating the complex interplay of power, economy, and human rights. It serves as a reminder of the resilience of enslaved individuals and their descendants, who continue to fight for recognition, justice, and equality in the face of a legacy marked by oppression. The repercussions of this dark chapter are still felt today, influencing contemporary discussions on race, identity, and reparations across the globe.